What explains the distribution of income in a country? Economics is about how resources are used and who gets it. This is where we focus on the who gets it part. First, let us understand the distinction between stocks and flows. A flow is the movement of a quantity during an interval of time. So, for example, if you wanted to describe the amount of traffic on your street, you would say that we have 7 cars each minute. You have to specify the duration because it's a flow. A stock is a quantity that exists at a point in time. How many cars are in the parking lot? Well, there are 4 cars in the parking lot. But the answer is different if it's 7 a.m., 10 a.m., or 3 p.m. So you have to specify what is the point in time that you're talking about, because the stock can change from time to time. Income is a flow. Income has to be expressed per unit of time. I earn $500 per day. That's the duration. Wealth is a quantity at a point in time. Currently, my wealth is $1,800. Of course, wealth doesn't have to be in the form of money. Money is only one of the assets in which you can store your wealth. So your house or your university degree is part of your human capital, your business. But the point is, wealth is a stock, income is a flow. So with that background, let's move on to our analysis of inequality. First, our unit of analysis is the household. And the reason we do this is because it is the income of the household that determines how well off everyone in the household lives. So we focus not on each person's income, but on the income of the household. A productive endowment is an asset that you can rent out to the economy and from which you earn an income. It's an asset that can contribute to the production process. So capital is a productive endowment. It can be equipment, it can be a business, it can be real estate, and labor is a productive endowment. Your ability to walk into a business place or a factory and to work. For this analysis, we are going to separate from physical ability the knowledge and skills that a person may have. And we're going to treat that as more akin to capital than really a part of labor. So what we call capital consists of 2 types of capital. Physical capital, the equipment and buildings and so on, and human capital, the knowledge and skills that a person acquires. And the reason we're doing that is because human capital is more like physical capital than it is like labor. Both physical capital and human capital are acquired by investment. And so therefore, it's amenable to being produced. Indeed, one can think of machinery and knowledge as merely 2 alternative ways of increasing the productivity of a person's basic physical and mental ability. So having separated human capital, then when we talk about labor, we're talking about simply the untrained physical and mental abilities of a person. I guess what you might call the unskilled part of labor. Now, we are using only two productive endowments to explain this analysis. But indeed, one can do so by dividing productive endowments into a far greater number of segments. One can separate different types of capital, different types of human capital, different types of physical capital. You know, the knowledge and skills of being a lawyer are different from being an engineer, are different from being a skilled machinist, are different from being a social care worker. So what we do applies generally across all the different kinds of productive endowments, but for this analysis, we are aggregating productive endowments into only two types: unskilled labor and capital. And the returns to labor and capital are determined in their respective markets. The labor market determines the average wage of unskilled labor, and the market for capital determines the rental price of capital, the earnings of capital. And that takes various forms. You know, it takes a form of explicit rent or leases or interest or dividends, but we're incorporating all of that into an average rental price of capital. So from where does the income of a household come? Well, it comes from the fact that it owns productive endowments that can contribute to the economy's creation of wealth. So for example, whatever number of working persons are in the household, that is a part of its productive endowment. Its stock of physical or physical/financial assets, because financial assets are a claim on physical assets, that is part of a household's productive endowments. And its stock of human capital is part of its productive endowments. So since we have simplified these endowments into a small number of categories, think of this as simply counting up the number of productive endowments. How many working people? How many units of capital does it have? You can think of this simply as, in the case of human capital, how many university degrees are in the household. Of course, university degrees are not the only kind of human capital, but this is just to give you an idea that we're thinking of this in a simple quantitative sense. If we know what are the productive endowments that a household possesses, then we add to that the factor markets determining what is the return to each kind of productive endowment. So if the factor markets say that labor is worth $100 a day and you have 2 labor units, then this household's income is going to be $200 a day from labor. And if the market for capital determines that the return to capital is $200 a day, and this household has, say, 3 units of capital, then its capital income is going to be 3 times 200, which is 600. So this is the idea. This is the model that determines household income. Income flows from the household's endowments combined with the market's determination of the return to each unit of endowment. To put it another way, the stock of productive assets determines the flow of household income. So a poor household ends up being poor because it doesn't have a lot of productive assets from which to earn income to contribute to the economic process. Whereas a typical poor household has maybe one working person, it's a single-headed household, and so it only has labor income from one generally unskilled person. A wealthy household may have two working persons, maybe the mother and the father are both present, as well as ownership of a business or real estate that they earn income from, or shares in publicly traded companies. In addition to which, one or more of the working persons may have professional training. And part of their income, part of their capital income, comes from the knowledge acquired from being a lawyer. So a wealthy household ends up having a higher income because of a greater stock of productive assets. So we can use this to answer our question, why is there so much inequality in the distribution of income? And the answer is, the variation in the distribution of income derives from a prior variation in the stock of productive assets that is owned by households. Differences in the stock explain differences in the flow. So our question about why is there so much variation in the distribution of income now becomes a question of why is there so much variation in the stock of household productive assets. Well, one explanation is that many households are single-headed households, only have one income, and that tends to be a characteristic of the poorest households. This may be partly a matter of choice, that you do have some control over whether you establish a traditional nuclear family or you want to make a go of your life on your own. But it is also largely a matter of chance. For one example, the household that you grew up in, you didn't get to pick the family structure. Whether it was a two-income or a single-headed household, you know, as a 12-year-old, didn't get a vote in that. So a lot of it has to do with the chance of the household that you grew up in. The distribution of productive assets that are capital, well, that has to do partially with family background and the conditions of your life, some of which is choice. You can acquire productive assets by making the investment on your own. That is, you can invest in acquiring productive assets, whether it's human capital or physical capital. You have a choice in that. But here too, a great deal of it is chance. That many persons inherit their capital from the household in which they grew up in, from their parents. And parents are able to pass on capital not only by literally bequeathing bank accounts and businesses, but to the extent that wealthy households are able to invest in better quality education for their children, able to send them to better elementary schools and better high schools, which matriculates you to better universities and greatly increases your chances of getting professional degrees, then that is a way in which physical capital can get transformed into human capital in a subsequent generation. And much of that is outside of the control of the individual who ends up with the capital. You didn't choose which level of wealth of household to get born into. So a lot of that is chance too. So this is ultimately the answer to our question. Changes in the variation in the distribution of income is due to variation in the productive endowments that belong to households. And that variation is due to choices that members of those households may have made in the past, but to a great extent is due to the accident of circumstances and birth. So what can we do with this understanding of why there is so much variation in the distribution of income? Why households some are wealthy and some are poor? Let's see if we can use it to answer some questions about inequality. How does technological change affect inequality? Let's look at skill-based technological change, because skill-based technological change replaces unskilled labor with capital, with physical capital. To the extent that technological change is taking place of this type, then it's going to reduce the demand for unskilled labor, thus lowering the wage, and increase the demand for machinery, for physical capital, which is going to increase the return to capital. If your household has lots of capital, then your income is going to go up. Its labor income will fall, but for a household with lots of physical and human capital, the part of their income that represents their basic physical and mental abilities, the unskilled portion of their labor, is only a tiny fraction of their total income. So that household is going to be much better off by skill-based technological change. A poor household that is unlikely to have capital income is going to be worse off. So based on our model, then skill-based technical change is going to worsen inequality. As an application of what we have learned, there was an article recently from the Business Standard that spoke about the trends in inequality in the world. Inequality, it says, has increased in most countries, while it has declined in Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa, which is where the poor countries are. So what it is really saying is that inequality has increased in the wealthier countries and has declined in the poorer countries. Let us explore what role increasing globalization, in particular, increasing trade in goods and services, might have played in these two trends. First, let us look at the case of developed countries, rich countries. Those countries have a comparative advantage in capital-intensive products, in products that use lots of physical capital, but in particular, lots of knowledge capital, human capital. So if trade opens up between a rich country and a poor country, that opening up of trade that we call globalization, it means that demand for capital-intensive products is not going to be now coming only from the rich country themselves, but the poor country is going to be importing capital-intensive products from the rich country as well. The rich country is going to be importing labor-intensive products from the poor country. So the demand for unskilled labor is going to go down in the rich country, reducing unskilled wages there. And demand for capital goes up in the rich country since they are producing more of the capital-intensive products that they are selling not only to themselves, but also to the poor countries. So in the typical rich country, we're going to see returns to capital rising and returns to labor falling. In the typical country, the opening up of trade between a rich country and a poor country is going to widen inequality. But in the developing country, since their advantage is in labor-intensive products, they are going to be producing more labor-intensive products to export to the rich countries and less capital-intensive products, because instead of producing those themselves, they are importing those from rich countries. So the demand for labor increases in the developing country, and the demand for capital declines. Labor income goes up, capital income goes down. So in the typical developing country, we're going to see, as capital income falls and labor income rises, a decrease in inequality. So that's just an application of our perspective on what determines inequality. Our takeaway is that incomes are unequal because productive endowments are unequally distributed.